Geoff, there are just so many options at wide receiver when you look up and down the board for the week 1 slate, and that includes the very top of the board with 9 wide receivers, all at 7K or higher. So who's your favorite play out of this high-priced group?
Yeah, when you look at this group, obviously it just feels like any one of these guys could go off for 30-plus points, especially in week 1. But for me, Jesse, my favorite play is going to be Calvin Ridley at just under 8K, 7,900. It's a player who was 7th in targets last year. Averaged just under 10 targets per game, and now you've got Julio Jones leaving the situation. You just feel like Calvin Ridley, the targets are just going to be an absolute explosion this year, just from that perspective. But you also have a team in Atlanta and Philly in this matchup in week 1 where they're both top 10 in terms of pace of play last year. Philly, in terms of corners, their highest rated corner in Pro Football Focus was Stevie Nelson at 36. This is not a deep cornerback crew at all. If anyone gets hurt in game, this could just be an absolute drubbing. So for me, the matchup, when you take everything into consideration, it's Calvin Ridley here. I think this going up against this Eagles secondary, it's going to be a real good week 1 for him.
All right, Matt, what do you think? Plenty of guys to choose from. 9 wide receivers, all at 7K or higher. Who's your favorite play?
So I'm actually going to pick the same player, and I think the reason that I like him is a bit different, though. It's a lot of it is because the Falcons should have some popular players across the board at a bunch of positions. Mike Davis could be a pretty common spend down option at running back, and then you have Kyle Pitts at tight end. So I think there's a bit of leverage with Ridley where he would negatively correlate with those other guys on his team. And if the ball is just being funneled to Ridley throughout the game, which could happen just because of how good he is, maybe he's open, Pitts doesn't get as involved. And if you don't play Kyle Pitts in your lineup, I think Ridley is a way to have some more security that there's actually a reasonable path to Kyle Pitts not doing well. Not to say that this isn't a full team stack that can't do well, but I think playing Ridley instead of Kyle Pitts, and also in a spot where a lot of the field will probably have cheaper wide receivers, I think paying up in general makes a lot of sense. So there's a lot of good choices here, but I do think Ridley, for that reason, might be a bit better of a choice than some of the other guys at the high end of the salary range.
Reid, which high-priced wide receiver are you going with?
Yeah, I'm going to do a little bit of a Geoff Ulrich here and mention a few guys, but only hone in on one. I think the Tennessee receivers are viable, absolutely. I think you can pay down for Julio. I think when you talk about both of these guys in that high-powered matchup, it's going to be nice. I think Justin Jefferson also, too, is someone that you can definitely take a look at. But give me DK Metcalf. I talked about Russ Wilson earlier. I love DK Metcalf in this spot. If you look at the games that Russ Wilson threw for over 300 yards, Jesse, and it was weird. Weeks 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9 were those first 5. So all odd weeks. He scored over 20 DK fantasy points on average. And one of those weeks was against Arizona, where he only put up 4.9 DK fantasy points. This guy's an absolute monster. When Russ Wilson has a plus matchup, he looks at DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett is fine, but give me the touchdown upside with a guy like DK Metcalf. I think they get started very early.
Well, guys, a lot of the fun of NFL DFS is finding the right stacks. So do you have a favorite quarterback wide receiver combo for this slate, Matt?
Yeah, I think I'm going with Ryan Fitzpatrick and Terry McLaurin. And part of why I like it is it's a similar reason to what I mentioned with Ridley. Antonio Gibson, I think, could be one of the chalk running backs. So if you're looking for a way to differentiate from the field, you play the passing game instead of the running game with this team. But I just think the mid-range salary-wise for receivers kind of gets overlooked. There's some way underpriced guys in the 4,000s, and then there's obviously some elite options in the 7,000s and 8,000s. And McLaurin is in that no man's land at 6,400, where I just don't think that any receiver in that range gets a lot of attention. But McLaurin is just really good, and I think a lot of what happened last year, where he was great at the beginning of the season, is he just wasn't healthy down the stretch of the regular season, and he should be fully ready to go. It's week 1. Theoretically, everyone's healthy. So I like that game stack a lot, and particularly Fitzpatrick and McLaurin.
Reid, what about you? Do you have a favorite quarterback wide receiver combo?
Yeah, future Hall of Famer Ryan Fitzpatrick, right, Geoff? No, I don't know if he's going to be in the Hall of Fame, but
after this year, after the Super Bowl, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I love McLaurin. I love that call. Matt's been talking about McLaurin for like 4 months already about how good of a matchup. He's my second best in terms of that matchup on this slate. I think Brandon Ayuk and Jimmy Garoppolo, no one's going to be playing Jimmy Garoppolo. So I think that's there. But I'm going to go back to my Zach Wilson call and pair him up with Elijah Moore at $8,000 total for GPP. I get this. And Garrett kind of mentioned it earlier. You're going to need a lot of points to take it on GPP. And this might be some leverage where you can get to that point against Carolina. Jamison Crowder is still unknown right, in terms of his status. So if he is out, look at Elijah Moore to get a lot of reps in the slot and maybe even on the outside. And again, this Carolina defense is not great. So I love Wilson and Elijah Moore at only $8,000. You can pay up at tight end. You can pay up at running back if you have these two guys and stack them together.
Jeff, what's your favorite QB wide receiver stack?
Yeah, I do think there's going to be a lot of high-priced stacks that are going to go underowned here, like Tyreek Hill, Mahomes, Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins. But I'm going to go a little bit cheaper. Another stack, I still think this stack is going to be underowned. It's Jalen Hurts and Devonta Smith. I don't know why people aren't excited about Jalen Hurts in week one. Again, we mentioned Atlanta, one of the faster-paced teams in the NFL. It's a great matchup. They were 5th last in yards per attempt last year. And it just feels like people have just kind of just forgotten about what Jalen Hurts did as a quarterback last season. And a lot of it was with the legs, but let's remember, this dude also didn't really have a true number one receiver. Now you've got Devonta Smith. Nobody's hyped about him because he missed most of preseason. By all accounts, he's practiced the last couple of weeks. He's fully healthy. He's $4,500, Jesse, going up against the Atlanta Falcons, who, again, not a good defense, don't have a good pass rush. I think for a combo of upside and potential, again, we're talking about an Eagles team. Defensively, they're not going to be stopping the Atlanta offense. This is a game that you should see fast-paced, lots of offensive and red zone opportunities. I absolutely love this stack. Love Jalen Hurts week one, and you got to go with the rookie, the Slim Reaper at $4,500. Way too cheap.
Ooh, all right, Reid, where's the value at wide receiver for opening weekend?
How about a guy that no one wants to play, Jesse? Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase under $5,000. I believe he's at $4,800. Look, how many drops did he have? I think, you look at Twitter, he had 1,000 drops in the preseason, right? And that doesn't scare me at all. You look at this guy, he's one of the top draft picks in the NFL draft this season. And let's remember, he didn't play competitive football last season in his final year in college. And so it's taking him some time to get ready. And I know there's a lot of mouths to feed in that Cincinnati passing offense, but I'm not scared of this Minnesota defense. Patrick Peterson, gave up 600 passing yards, which is his first time in 8 or 9 years that he's done this, or since 2014. So 7 or 8 years, my math's correct. And I'm not scared of Breland as well. And this game should be high scoring. The Minnesota team, like I mentioned, Justin Jefferson and this Minnesota passing offense should do well as well. So I love Jamar Chase at $4,800. I don't think anybody's going to be paying up or paying down for him at all.
Jeff, talk to me about some value.
Yeah, I mean, look, I already mentioned one. I think the range, you can find value at any range in DFS. There's guys who can be 7K and value, but I really feel like for week one, the sub 5K guys, like Reid mentioned already, you're going to find some real value because a lot of these guys were undervalued. We didn't know their role, and now their roles have grown. And Michael Pittman at 4,100 is a great example. We knew he was probably going to be growing into a bit of a bigger role with Indy as the season grew on. Obviously he's a top, a fairly high draft pick from last year, had a nice end to the year, but now no T.Y. Hilton. You look at the Indianapolis Colts depth chart, they don't really have a true pass catching tight end. Where are the targets going except to Michael Pittman, who does profile as a number one wide receiver? Again, 4,100. I'm not sure why people aren't trusting this more, to be honest. This is a guy who, again, was a pretty high draft pick. People are all high on the Carson Wentz move. Well, he's got to throw the ball to someone. I expect Michael Pittman to perhaps, project for 7+ targets here in week one against Seattle, who, is the favorite right now. So you're probably going to see some good passing downs, just passing situations by the Colts late in this game. I think Michael Pittman at 4,100 is one of the best values on the board, along with Devonta Smith, who I already mentioned.
All right, Matt, where are you looking for value at the wide receiver position?
The full answer is that I'm really trying to avoid value at receiver in general. I think that the way to be different from the field is to be a little more expensive with your receivers and play cheaper running backs, because guys like Marquez Callaway, Marvin Jones Jr., and T. Higgins they just figure to be really chalky on this slate because all three are underpriced. So Reid and Jeff already mentioned other guys that aren't those players, and I think you can play cheaper receivers that just aren't them. These are just, I think, highly touted picks for a long time. I mean, we get this for week one sometimes where there's just so much build up to the season and everyone ends up playing a lot of the same guys. So I don't really have a favorite that's in this price range that I would call the value, but I do think, well, Reid alluded to it a little bit, this Niners game, and then maybe on the other side you play Tyrell Williams, who's cheap. I just think no one's playing Jared Goff, and I think you could get a cheap stack there, but maybe a little safer you play the Niners side. But there are cheap receivers on both sides of that game. Maybe Deebo Samuel too is a little more expensive. But I do like that game for quote unquote value. I just think it's important to mention that going all the way down to the 3,000s and 4,000s could put you on to a lot of the same players that everyone else has.
All right, Jeff, it is slate approved pick time. Who is your favorite wide receiver play on the week 1 slate?
I think it's really close between Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins this week, but I already mentioned Ridley, and that's definitely going to be my pick. I think the matchup is just slightly better. And again, there's just no competition for targets. I know Kyle Pitts is there, but I don't expect him to take all those Julio targets. So for me, with the matchup with Philly, it's Calvin Ridley for week 1.
All right, Matt, who you going with?
Yeah, I'll just go right back to McLaurin. I think it's just a matter of this pricing where you have receivers in the 4,000s and then you have other receivers in the 7,000s. And I think that's where the ownership goes on both of those ends of the spectrum. So Terry McLaurin, 6,400 with, I guess he's a stud Ryan Fitzpatrick. I think he's good enough, though, to get McLaurin the ball. And McLaurin is just potentially a great receiver who didn't have quarterback play that really supported him at all last year. And I think with a semi-competent guy in Fitzpatrick this year, he could produce a lot better than he has.
Reid, slate approved wide receiver for week 1.
Yeah, just stay healthy, Fitzpatrick, please, so McLaurin can eat. It's DK Metcalf for me. I think he's a fine play at 7,500. On GPPs, I also like Brandon Ayuk. If he doesn't go too far, too heavily owned, and if he's healthy week 1, I think against Detroit or anybody against Detroit is going to be nice. So give me Brandon Ayuk too if a lot of people go on Raheem Mostert.